Life is a series of unscripted experiences that forge us into unique individuals. These are the experiences and stories of those who possess the will, beliefs, and fortitude required to overcome obstacles, pursue their passions, and achieve success. Welcome to the HawkCast with your host, AJ Hawk.
Richard Deitsch joins us right now, host of the SI Media podcast, which recently hit over 1 million downloads. So congrats on that, Richard, and thanks for coming.
You got it, man. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
And now, just talking about your podcast quickly, it's really good. I mean, for anyone that hasn't heard it, what was your goal going into that when you started your podcast?
I certainly didn't have any metric goals, and the fact that more than 1 million people have downloaded it is honestly kind of surprising. I work at a big place, so I'm not trying to sort of play down the fact that I'm at a big brand, but it's niche content, it's specialized content. But what I found is that more people I think are interested in sports media topics than I think a lot of publications and outlets over the years would have guessed. And the other thing that I've really grown to like about the podcast is that people really enjoy talking about what they do. And if you give them a chance to expound on that, and if you sit back and just listen as opposed to interject all the time, you can get some really interesting things. So that's twofold. One, I found that more people are interested in this than I would have expected initially. And then secondly, people really take pride in their jobs and they like talking about it, and they don't often have a forum to talk about it. You know, if you're a sports center anchor, you talk about sports and you have forums to talk about sports all the time. But you generally speaking don't have a forum to talk about, here's how I work with my producer. Here's how much time I spend writing my scripts. Here's how I prepare for my day. So that's been pretty interesting for me.
Now, before you started, were you hesitant about reaching out to some of the guests? Because at times, I know you've criticized many people on the media, or not criticized, but you're pretty honest. And that's the thing. Right. It's tough to hear criticism for whoever you are. And so have you had any backlash from that, or had anybody that won't come on your show?
It's a good question. You know, at least when I'm writing about sports media stuff, I try to have anything that is critical framed in reporting and accuracy, if nothing else. I mean, I have my opinions on stuff, but I hope people at this point have come to know that it's based in some kind of reporting, or it's based hopefully in some kind of thoughtful manner, as opposed to just blasting away for the sake of blasting. Nobody has turned me down based on anything I've previously written, AJ, but I'll be honest with you. I have not invited Skip Bayless on. You know, I have not invited Colin Cowherd on. I've not invited Stephen A. Smith on. A lot of the bloviators that I've sort of addressed over the years, I haven't necessarily put the invite to them. So I'm not sure there's anybody out there who, I've been really critical of at times, who I've asked to come on. My sense is some would, and then I think some would not. There are also people, I'll be honest, that I would not have on. I'm at the point, if I'm just going to be totally blunt, I have zero professional respect for someone like Skip Bayless. I don't think I could be in the same room with them, let alone the same phone line. I don't think I have the stomach for it, so I don't think I'd make the invite. That said, I've probably given up a lot of potential downloads because I think people would listen to that.
Now, what is it with Skip? I know I've listened to a lot of your episodes on your podcast, and you talk about it. And I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, because I know it's something that you continue to bring up, even with whatever guest you have. It seems like whether they work for ESPN, Fox, whatever, they're like, what's going on? And you always ask them, and it's a funny little banter you have. But what is it about having zero respect for him? Is it as a broadcaster person, or what is it? Just strictly professional? Strictly
professional. I mean, from everything I've heard, he's good with a lot of times, AJ, you probably know this. You could tell how someone is, generally speaking, as a person by how they treat people who can do nothing for them, like how they deal with the PAs on television, or the camera people who are inside the studio. And I hear Bayless has a pretty good reputation. He's not a bad guy in that sense. So it's all professional. And I have zero respect for him, because I think he is the epitome of saying things for manufactured value. I find him to be a professional wrestling heel going after athletes and others just for the sake of the attention. At a certain point, when you consistently criticize LeBron James, arguably the greatest player of our generation, and the criticism just has no basis in reality, the criticism is about pointing the spotlight on you, I can't have any respect for that. That said, I know there's a lot of people out there who'd say, guy's an entertainer, nothing more, and he's doing what his bosses are asking him to do. So I get that. At the same time, I don't have to like it, and if I have a forum to express my thoughts, I'm going to express them.
That was going to be my follow-up quickly, was how can we argue with a guy that I think you reported that he's making $5.5 million to move over to Fox? Yeah,
I mean, listen, in terms of being successful, he's the most successful professional wrestling heel in the history of sports television. So if you judge it on the metrics of cash, he's the winner, the ultimate winner. I would, and I've asked this of ESPN and Fox, is if this is the guy who's the centerpiece of your brand, what does that say about your brand? Like, what's the message out there? But in television, a lot of times people don't care about that stuff. They care about one thing. They care about ratings, and they care about social currency. And social currency is, are people talking about my people on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram? And Bayless traditionally has been great at that. He gets people talking. He gets people mad. And that's his job. And if you are willing to do that every day, you can probably make a lot of money in the business. If you're willing to go to that place where people don't really have respect for you, but they're, for lack of a better word, entertained by you, you can make money.
Do you think it's a conscious effort for him to go against what the mainstream might be thinking just to upset him?
I think it's all manufactured, but I think at this point, I don't know how much pro wrestling you've watched over your life, but you know, at a certain point when these guys, like, they take the character in ring and it becomes who they are out of ring, that's what I think it is for this guy. So I don't even know where the line begins and ends with performance. I think he has become the character that he also plays on TV. So I think it's conscious, and then I bet you sometimes it's unconscious too.
It seems as if a guy like Ric Flair, I think Ric Flair carries over into every part of his life.
Right. Ric Flair is a guy who lived the nature boy kind of motif outside. You know, he talked about high living. He would be drinking on the road. He was married, but he was totally, cheating on his wife. I mean, he tried to live whatever you think the nature boy was. And I would say to incredible fame and success, but also to some destruction, in that you look at his finances over the years, they were a mess, multiple marriages. So yeah, that's a perfect example. And that, by the way, I think like Randy Savage might have been also one of the great examples of that. I think if you read about pro wrestlers, and I find that topic fascinating, Macho Man pretty much lived his character 24/7 away from the ring as well.
Have you ever covered wrestling for Sports Illustrated?
Yeah, I've interviewed, including on the podcast, a number of people within the wrestling business. Paul Heyman, who is the manager of Brock Lesnar, who's a great interview. If you could ever get him on, I would recommend it. He's money in the bank. Interviewed Renee Young, who's a broadcaster for WWE, who used to work for the Score in Canada. She went from a traditional broadcast job into working for the WWE, which I find really interesting. Michael Cole, who's the main voice of wrestling, did a long Q&A with him. He has an interesting news background before he went to wrestling. And David Shoemaker, who hosts a popular podcast, he's the Masked Man. He's now at The Ringer. He used to be at ESPN. He was a guest of mine. And yeah, I'm like fascinated by that world. I'm trying to get John Cena, before he hosts the ESPYs, to come on the podcast. I think he might. But like, I'm so fascinated how these guys morph between reality and their reality in the ring. It's like very interesting to me. Like they how do you turn the character off when you walk out of the arena, which I think must be really tough, because anybody who's a fan of this and sees you outside is expecting you to be, that guy or that woman. So it's interesting. And it's interesting too, just how a lot of times the wrestling writers use real life stuff into the storyline. Like that's kind of interesting to me. So I'm fascinated by that world. It's just like an interesting world.
It's a crazy world that Vince McMahon has manufactured and made into this monster. The thing that is crazy about Vince. He's not scared of any storyline, and I don't really follow a whole lot of wrestling, but I saw when I forget the wrestler who had like a Paul Heyman type guy who would walk to the ring with him. He died, and they brought him. He really died in real life, and I think it was CM Punk took his urn and was throwing it around the ring. Do you remember that? Do you know who that was?
No, I don't remember, but that sounds exactly like something the WWE would do.
Yeah, I forget. Maybe it was The Undertaker if he had a guy. I can't think of it. Any of the wrestling fans know instantly who I'm talking about. It was a couple years ago, and I remember because a Sirius radio show I listened to was talking about just how ruthless Vince was, and the guy carried his supposed ashes. Obviously, I doubt his ashes were in there, but you never know with Vince. And then the CM Punk took it and started throwing it and kicking it around the ring.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Punk was very famous. Now CM Punk is now a wrestler, an MMA guy. I mean, but he was very famous for like breaking what they say, like the wall down between the scripted stuff going on TV and at the arena and you at home. And that's like kind of why I like CM Punk, is he would be a guy who would cross that line. He'd kind of let the audience in on what goes behind the scenes. But a lot of, there's a lot of sports television that takes some stuff from wrestling, is that they can manufacture debates, they can create enemies. And, you talk to TV producers, and a lot of what they are going for is like conflict and debate. That sells a lot of television. So I understand that. It's just when it becomes so like farcical to me, it's just bothering to me as a viewer.
So that's a world that I'm very interested in, because I want to go into broadcasting. I'd like to call games and be an analyst. So I have plenty of other questions about that for you. But first, I wanted to ask you: do you think producers and executives, say it's a panel show and there's 3 or 4 guys, and a guy like Kevin Burkhart's leading the panel,
right,
or just a 5-minute segment? Do they ever come up to these guys and tell them, hey, which side are you on? Oh, I'm going to be pro LeBron. This guy, I'm against him. And this guy's going to stay in the middle. Do they manufacture it like that?
I think what happens on a lot of these shows, I shouldn't say a lot, but some shows, is they all have pre-show meetings. So everybody sits down and they talk about, all right, here's what the stories of the day are. This is what we're going to focus on. So let's say as we're taping today, the Cavs just blew out the Raptors. So somebody may have a take that I think the Raptors are done, or I think last night the Raptors quit on their team. Somebody else has a take that I think LeBron once again has proven himself to be a guy who can lead a squad to the finals. Another guy would be like, LeBron is never going to be Jordan. Jordan wouldn't have allowed these guys to get to Game 6. So I think you figure all this stuff out in a pre-show meeting. A lot of shows, it's not as like, hey, you have to say this, you have to say that. I think what they do is they come up with talking points prior to broadcast, which they know they're going to go to, and then inevitably the conflict comes. First Take, though, is a show where I know for sure they are looking for topics where they disagree on. And over the years, it's been very easy. Bayless will sort of flag way for the Cowboys and Tony Romo or Tim Tebow, and Smith obviously doesn't like those teams, so that's an easy find. But from talking to a lot of people in television, they go in with a kind of like a top line idea of what they want to talk about. One of the things that I love about the Inside the NBA is it's very unscripted. And Barkley, Shaq, Kenny Smith barely do any of these pre-shows. And Barkley has told me many times when I've interviewed him, he's going to come in with like 1 or 2 things he wants to talk about. But in general, that show is like jazz. It's like improvised and it flows. And to me, that's great television. That's far more interesting to me than any show that's like, all right, here's our topic 1, here's our topic 2, here's our topic 3. You take this side on topic 1, you take this side on topic 1. That's why I like Inside the NBA, and that's why I like college football, College Game Day. Those to me are the 2 best studio shows, because they're the shows to me that feel less rehearsed more than any other studio show that I think is currently on TV.
Now, with Inside the NBA and Charles Barkley, I've heard you said on your podcast you think maybe Charles Barkley is the only guy in media that will actually bring viewers to a show. Right. And I 100% agree with you. I think if Barkley decided to leave Inside the NBA, I think the ratings would drop in half.
Yeah. First of all, AJ, thank you for listening to the podcast. You are a true believer here. You're right. Yeah, I do believe that. I think he is the only guy currently working in television where you as a viewer think about, I'm going to go to Inside the NBA after the game because I want to hear what these guys have to say, including, by the way, if the game's on ESPN. which is always interesting. And that sometimes happens at the finals when people will go to NBA TV because they know Barkley's going to be on NBA TV. If I think about it, he's the only guy. I mean, there are very good studio analysts in television, but he is the only guy I actually believe who brings viewers or new viewers to that program. And I think the ratings back it up because the ratings for that show after big games are always great. If he left, I'm with you. I think the show would go down 40-30% in ratings. I think it would be game-changing. And that's saying that even though I like Kenny Smith and Shaq, I think they found their places for sure on that show. What'll be really interesting is if someone like Kenny Smith gets a job in NBA management to see how the dynamic of the show would change without Kenny, because he's kind of, out of the three former NBA guys, he's like the most straight guy out of those guys. Shaq is kind of a comic. Barkley's obviously Barkley. Kenny's more of the reasoned voice. So I think if he ever left, I think they would need to find somebody with a similar personality to replace Kenny. And I don't know how easy that would be. The other thing, too, is one of the few shows in sports television where the dominant, and I'm talking about popular, the dominant group of analysts are black. Three black guys on that set, generally speaking, one white guy. That's a rarity in terms of racial breakdown. And a rarity, and what's interesting to me is the show has been obviously adopted by every race and every ethnicity. So that's a color, in an interesting way, that's a pretty colorblind show for viewers. They don't look at it as three black guys, one white guy. They look at it as here are these three interesting guys and Ernie Johnson.
I agree with you on the Kenny Smith and the Shaq deal. They all play off each other great, but we all I would say a lot of people don't even know what the name of the show is. Like, let's turn on Barkley. Let's see what Barkley says about this.
Exactly.
Or at least Barkley and the guys, and I play in the American Century Championship out in Lake Tahoe every summer, and Barkley plays in it. And he's famous for his golf swing.
Right.
And that dude, you talk about a guy that treats everyone around him amazing. I mean, he's the best ever. It was like the highlight of our life. We saw him on the driving range a couple years ago and got to talk to him, and just how he interacts with people, man. I can't describe it. He's so open and honest and doesn't care at all. He's pouring he's up on the DJ. He's DJing, pouring shots in people's mouths. It's like a tradition for him out there. Yeah,
you make a great point. Having been in two situations with him where I saw him interact massively with the public. One as part of like a press event. There weren't many of us. There were like two or three. I took the New York City subway with him to the Barclays Center. So we took the train from Manhattan to the Nets game, and it was fascinating to see him interact on the subway with people. And the other time was in Austin, where he was at South by Southwest, that big conference there, and I was the moderator for a panel he was on, and I saw him sort of interact with the crowd and walk outside afterwards. The guy likes people. That's like where it starts. He just loves people. He treats everybody, I agree, just like somebody who he wants to talk to. He doesn't ever come off like a Hall of Famer, or sort of bigger than people. And the other thing is, and he's always told me this, is he made a decision at some point in his life, I think when he was during his career, that he was not going to be afraid to say whatever the hell he wanted and let the consequences be damned. Like, he will say shit that will bother you, but he doesn't care. Like, he is just about, I'm going to say what I believe, and if people criticize me, what the hell? They're going to criticize me anyway. I'm not sure I've ever seen a broadcaster, and you as a former professional athlete would know better than me. I don't know if I've ever seen a professional athlete who feels more free than Charles Barkley did when he played and now in his post-career. There's just not many guys who kind of, I don't know if we're allowed to curse on this podcast.
It's all mine.
Honestly, there's just not many guys who just kind of have a what the fuck attitude. And I think there's a lot of freedom with that. He's the best I've ever seen in sports broadcasting. There are other people who love fans and they're great with them. I've never seen a guy, though, more than Barkley, just sort of have a sense of who he is and accept that, which is amazing. I love the guy. He's one of the best people I've ever talked to as a media writer, and I think he's an incredible talent. And Turner, to their credit, knew that early, and they have locked him up for 20-plus years. Been really smart. Yeah, well, I'm saying since he started. Yeah.
Do you have any idea what his annual salary?
I know he recently signed an 8-year deal. That was his last deal. They just signed that last year, and I mean, this is a guess, but $5-6 million a year, something like that.
He's worth every penny.
Yeah, my sense is he could probably get, if he really wanted to push them, he could get more. But keep in mind, Charles isn't dumb. Charles does a lot of ads, right? I mean, that Weight Watchers deal was a seven-figure deal. Every year at the NCAA tournament, he does the ads with Spike Lee and Sam Jackson. That's a seven-figure deal. He probably does speaking engagements. So he's used Turner's platform to leverage him making money elsewhere. So money, not to mention whatever he saved, obviously from his playing career. So he's done very well. I don't think he's the highest paid person in sports television. My sense of somebody like Gruden or Al Michaels or Costas or somebody is probably at that level. But Charles is probably in the top 10.
Well, were you surprised to see Mike Tirico head over to NBC?
Yeah, I was. Not because what Tirico's going to do isn't going to be great. I mean, to get a shot at being an Olympic host is there's 3 jobs in the world like that. If you take it from primetime morning and the middle of the day. And Sunday Night Football to replace Al Michaels, that is the premier package on television prime. It's what Monday Night Football used to be. So the opportunities for him at NBC were incredible. Where I was surprised is that he was a lifer at ESPN. He had been there since he was, 24 years old. He had the best portfolio of any announcer at ESPN. If you think about it, think about what the guy did. He called the NBA, with the exception of the finals, called every big game. He called the finals a lot for ESPN Radio. He was a host in golf, Wimbledon, World Cup, things like that. And he had Monday Night Football, which essentially is one of the 4 best jobs in play-by-play NFL. Michaels, Buck, Jim Nantz, and Mike Tirico have the 4 best jobs because they're the 4 prime games. So I was surprised he left just because I think he had everything he wanted at ESPN. Management loved him, had a great schedule, but NBC had a couple of things, including the Olympics, that ESPN did not have. And it's a chance for Mike to travel less. He's 50 now, so takes your toll on the body a little bit. But I was surprised. I figured he'd be a lifer, but as he explained when he's talked about this, the lore of the lore of the Olympics, the potential to do Sunday Night Football, and obviously I'm sure a ton of money, got him there. So yeah, I was surprised, and I think it's an excellent hire for NBC. He's really what they need. They didn't have a person in house that was a perfect fit to replace Al Michaels, who's 71 whenever he decides to retire, and now they have a succession plan, which is big for them.
Do you think Al was on? Do you think they talked to Al about that before they hired him?
Yeah, I trust. Yeah, it's like Al's. It's like it's like the mob. Al's Tony Soprano. You're going to walk in and explain to him what's going on. I think out of respect for Al and out of respect for his years. The other thing too is the person who made this hire happen is Fred Godelli. He's the producer of Sunday Night Football. There is no way that he would not have told Al that this is going to happen. What I think, though, is that this is just a guess. I think they're going to let Al determine when Al wants to leave. So I think Tirico is going to come in and do Thursday Night Football, which NBC is splitting with CBS this year in the NFL Network. So I think Tirico will get his 5 games there. I think he'll do a lot of golf. He'll certainly do the Olympics. And I think they will let Al gradually decide when he wants to walk away. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have Al for 3-4 more years. And I think Mike Tirico, who's going to make a ton of money, will absolutely wait. He'll pay homage to Al, and 4 or 5 years from now, Mike will get that job. So I think Mike is smart, and I think Mike knows that it's going to be his one day. And as long as nobody rocks the boat, which I don't think anybody will, I think that'll be a great succession plan. The only sort of tweak in all this would be is if Al doesn't want to walk away, and then it gets a little tricky. And this is always what happens with a lot of older broadcasters is, you don't want to push a legend out. So you have to hope that he comes to a point where he's done. Vince Scully decided on his own to walk away. CBS is going to have this decision with Vern Lundquist. Hopefully they'll figure out what's a right time for him to walk away. Dick Enberg decided this year he's walking away after his last season with the Padres. Brent Musburger, this is going to come around for him too. All these guys are in their 70s. And so you want to give them the respect for them to make the choice. At the same time, you have a business to run and you need to plan for the future to have a younger guy in. So that's the only thing that could be tricky is if Al, for some reason, decides, I want to do this another 10 years. At the same time, though, AJ, Al's still the best in the business. So there's no reason for NBC to take him off. The guy's still great. When you think of big-time football, you think right now of Al Michaels, basically.
Yes, I do, and he's been amazing. I've dealt with him in a few like production meetings before Sunday night games, and just seems like such a genuine, authentic guy.
Very, very. I mean, think of what he's done in his career, from Miracle on Ice to all these major NFL games. He used to call Monday Night Baseball with Cosell. I mean, the guy's career is just is incredible. I mean, he's called so many great Olympic moments, so many great Super Bowls, so many great All-Star games. I mean, he's, when you talk about sort of television Hall of Fame, Mount Rushmore broadcasters, he's up there with Scully and Jim McKay and guys like that.
Speaking of guys getting pushed out, what happened, this isn't sports world, but when Regis got pushed off of his show? Did he get pushed off? Did he so-called retire? What happened?
I think a lot of times in broadcasting, networks try to find a way to, when contracts are coming up, to let older people sort of know that we're not going to re-sign them. You try to do it in the least, you let them say I'm leaving, but a lot of times that's not the case. It's they're pushing you out. You don't know how much of his co-star is part of that. In that case, it was Kelly Ripa, and she just got into her own sort of situation with Strahan, years later. I think in television, man, there's a lot of ageism. They want young people, and it's very rare to see older people allowed to stick on their shows for as long as they can. What you need is the juice to make that decision. You need to get to like a Letterman-like place where you have enough power where you can make the call when you're going to leave. So I haven't done any reporting on Regis, but that felt like he sort of was pushed out because if you remember, AJ, he leaves that show and then he went to Fox to host a show on FS1. So it's not like the guy wanted to get off TV, and I think this happens a lot. But it happens a million times more to women than it does to men. When women reach a certain age, usually in their late 40s or 50s, it always seems like they start getting pushed out for like a younger model. You see this on like morning shows. You see this on news shows.
What about Pam Oliver? I had her on here.
Exactly. Love Pam Oliver. And you know what? Pam Oliver, to her credit, decided not to take that. This was my story, and Fox was really pissed at me, which quite frankly I enjoyed. They went to Atlanta to basically fire her from the NFL. That's what they decided to do a couple of years ago. She then talked her way back to do one last year. If you remember, she was on the top team. She got demoted to the number 2 team with Burkhardt and those guys. Aaron Andrews got the top job that Pam had done with Aikman and Buck forever. And then Pam had a really good year. And Fox's executives decided, hey, maybe we shouldn't have put her out to pasture and we're going to re-sign her for another 2 years. So to Pam's credit, once she went public with this, which she should have, I think, because it was a total bogus, we love you, we don't want you on the NFL anymore, we're going to give you these like interview shows, which is just, it's total BS play. They tried to fire her in that sense. And so she went public with it, which I thought was great, had an excellent year, and now she's still doing the NFL. I've written a lot about this. It's very frustrating because in most other businesses, if you have like 20 years of experience, you are like considered an asset. Like people want you around because you know all the players, you know all the coaches, you have these great contacts. But in sports television, somehow if you're a 50-year-old woman, you're not as valuable as a 25-year-old woman coming in, which is absolutely ridiculous and can only speak to one thing. It speaks to the aesthetics and the looks of the people. So you can't tell me that Pam Oliver, and no disrespect to Aaron Andrews, Pam Oliver worked that league for 20 years. She has thousands of more contacts than Aaron Andrews. So you can't tell me that like a decision like that isn't based on anything other than just bringing somebody younger in and was it a question of bringing somebody younger and wider in? I don't know. I'd like to not think that Fox would go down that road, but there's no doubt that they made a decision based on youth. And to Pam's credit, who I really like, she had a great year, and to Fox's credit, they made a decision to re-sign her for a couple of years to do the NFL, which I think is good.
It seems like it just follows along with the whole Hollywood model.
Exactly.
You talk to any, or you listen to a lot of actresses, they talk about, hey, when I'm like 35 and up, there's no jobs anymore for us. Like you have to really struggle to find them.
Right. Good point. The only people who seem to be able to find jobs in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are the actresses who had such star power, Julia Roberts, Helen Mirren, Meryl Streep, etc., that they can still find those roles. But what about like the actresses who are like really good but not superstar good, like in their youth? Like, do we ever see them again in their 40s and 50s? And I'm sure it's just like sports. Like if you're Brett Favre or if you're Peyton Manning, you got a lot of juice and you could do a lot of things even after your career. But if you're middle of the road quarterback, things are different. So yeah, I mean, I think it's probably worse in Hollywood than it is in the sports media when it comes to like ageism and stuff like that. It almost strikes me that like you got to try to make your money early, because if you're a woman, because who knows what roles could exist when you're 50.
Or you 100% have to just hit it when it's hot, because you never know when it's going to cut off for you. And I have actors, guys and girls. Yeah,
that seems to me like that's the one profession where like you have to take your moment and try to get everything out of it, because it may not come around. It's also really interesting because like you see a lot of like actors and actresses who like have massive hits in their 20s, and it seems to me that you need great guidance, whether it's your agents or parents or something, to be able to handle that. Because think of how many people in their 20s who had incredible success, who by the time they're in their 30s, if they just blew their money or just sort of couldn't sort of handle the fame, lost it. Like Lindsay Lohan's a perfect example of like, people thought she was going to be like Julia Roberts kind of stardom. Mean Girls was a big hit. They were projecting her to be the star of stars, and she's sort of out of the game now in her 30s. I mean, and I feel like that's not an uncommon story for the most part.
It seems to be it happens all the time, and I can see it. Say you're a young kid and you're not going to normal school with your friends, you're homeschooling in between takes on the set.
Exactly.
You don't have a real view of what the world is like.
Yeah.
And then if you have some parents that don't know how to steer you in the right direction, Lindsay Lohan's a perfect example. It seems like her dad's been in and out of jail and rehab, and
exactly.
Shouldn't have a chance.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting is that it's not a perfect corollary, but you have Johnny Manziel, who came from a lot of money, who did have parents around. Whether they were good parents or not, I guess is all debatable. It's not for me or anybody to judge, in all honesty. But that's a guy who had really sort of everything working for him, and now we see him essentially throwing away an NFL career and could not handle both failure as well as stardom. So it also happens in the athletic world too, is guys who get too much too soon. And you know this, I can't even imagine what it's like at certain colleges, but it's very hard when you're 19 to be given everything. Everybody telling you you're great. You get money, you get women, you get fame. And then how do you handle that like at such a young age? If you don't have anybody around you to sort of ground you to say, take care of your money or just sort of take care of your body. This stuff doesn't last forever. That's why it's I always have a lot of admiration for the athletes who did not have any of this structure growing up. Like LeBron James, a perfect example. Single mother in a poor part of Cleveland has become a billionaire, basically, because he surrounded himself at a certain point of his life with some pretty good people who gave him advice, and he sort of stayed true to what the ultimate goal would be. Now, maybe he's just such a freak that he would have been a star anyway, but like that's interesting to me. And seems like there's a correlation with Hollywood people and athletes in finding stardom so young and to see who can handle it and who can't. There's probably actually, AJ, if you want to make it into my world, a lot of sports media people too. You see sometimes people in their 20s really blow up, and it's interesting to see how they handle sports media fame. Some handle it well and have a long career. Others, they get entitled and they start becoming a bit of an asshole within their organizations, and they don't get re-signed. And then you start seeing them on regional networks and smaller networks, and a great career starts going down. So it happens in the media too.
Do you have any examples of media people that you can think of off the top of your head like that has happened?
Let me think about that. I mean, I'm not sure how many people I want to blow out, but I do know a lot of people, particularly at ESPN, who after a little bit of fame, started asking for very big money at ESPN and big assignments. They did not get that, and they are consequently no longer at ESPN. So they're still in the business, but they're just at smaller places like regional networks or local sports news, and it has a real impact. It's the one thing they don't often teach you in journalism schools or communication schools is to how to manage your career and what are the steps. The one thing when any young person who wants to go into broadcasting ever contacts me, the one thing I tell them is one of the most important things in your life is to try to find an agent who's good and connected, who can help you. Because so much of the business is about having the relationships that can open the door for you to get to the producers at these places that can really make assignments and careers happen. And that's, it's interesting. Talent is one thing and it's important, but the networking element of sports media is huge, especially on the broadcast side.
Is it like a big fraternity? Because I say that all the time. Like NFL coaching is a big frat where and you need to make sure you keep all these lines open of communication, because if I'm a position coach and my head coach gets fired, I'm gone.
Yeah.
So I need one of my buddies that's got a coordinator job or something to hire me to another team. So they're always constantly working to make sure they know everybody. Hey, I'm good with everybody because I don't know what can happen.
I think it's very similar. One of the things that is very clear in today's sports media is that if you are rep by CAA, which is a gigantic agency, If Management is a very big agency too, Headline Media, Sandy Montag has big clients, Tirico, McDonough, etc. Your career can be very different if you are represented by one of these 4 or 5 very big agents or agencies. If you're not, you are really an outsider, and it's a struggle for you to get to the big places. Does it mean you can't get to the big places? No. It's happened, and people have done it even without agents. But, man, it makes the path – it gives you such a better shot if you get into one of these places, because these are the people who are emailing and calling the producers at ESPN and the talent offices at ESPN and Fox Sports 1 every day. They have the lines of communication to get you as a talent in front of the people who can sign that contract and sign that check. So it is similar, I think, to athletics in that so much of the business is about who you know and how you can get in front of the person who can ultimately make the decision to either hire you or not.
But at the same time, don't you think that agents are – I know in the sports world they're a lot less important now than they used to be with the rookie pay scale coming out, in the NFL at least, I should say. But in the broadcasting world, I'm in the process right now of looking at different things and what I should do. Sign with a broadcast agent. My football agent, Mike McCartney, is a great guy in Priority Sports, and they have a broadcasting section as well. Right. But the thing now, everyone is so accessible. I can reach out directly to all these people. I can find emails. I can hustle. Is it just people that are scared to hustle or scared to put themselves out there that need an agent more?
It's a little bit of both. I think there are some people who won't hustle like you're doing to find the contacts. But I do think, and this is the reality of it, I think it's hard. See, it's going to be a little different for you. You are a known entity because you played in the NFL. That's different from a woman or man who just graduated from like Syracuse or Northwestern who's trying to get into the business. You have different avenues because you played in a league which has a lot of contacts to broadcast places. But the value of these agents, obviously, is that they have a direct line and they deal with on pretty much a daily basis of the decision makers at these companies that bring people in for auditions, that know what jobs are available so that you can even target your client to that job. So that's the value and power of the agent, is that the agent is aware of what is going on at multiple companies so that they can, in theory, place you into said company that fits best for you. Now, it's not a charity. They're obviously doing that to get their percentage, and that's how they make their money. They're making their money off you. But if you can find the right agent who can really maximize your potential and your employment, I think they are worth it. If you can get, my sense is Mike Tirico would say his agent has been incredibly worth it. He's gotten him to the highest heights of broadcasting. But it is interesting because, I know of people who don't have a very famous guy at ESPN doesn't have an agent, John Buccigross. And he's had an excellent career, pretty much their face of the NHL with Melrose and Steve Levy. On SportsCenter, I think people really like him. And he's pretty much done it as a soloist. He does not have an agent. Now, he can do that much easier now at ESPN without one. But I do wonder when he first started out, was it difficult for him to get a look at ESPN without somebody pitching him? And that's the big question.
Yeah, it's different. It's definitely different than the whole football world, what an agent can do for you. But going back to what you said, something you said earlier, I'm not trying to turn this into like a pop culture deal. Right. I don't care. Sometimes it's entertaining to talk about that stuff. But what happened with the whole Strahan Kelly Ripa deal? Do you have any insight?
My only insight is that I would not believe anything you saw on television about Michael portraying his love for Kelly and
that was
I'm going to miss you
I saw the clips
and all that stuff. I think, that was acting 101. I don't think they particularly liked each other from what I've heard from people who would be in the know. I think, though, that's not so uncommon. I think a lot of people on, morning shows and shows that are multi-host shows don't particularly love each other. You just gotta do it in front of the camera. And I think that one of the big tells here is that, they did the whole sort of dog and pony show, thanks for your opportunity, I love you, blah, blah, blah. If they loved each other, why did Michael Strahan get out of Dodge 2 weeks after all this blew up? If you love each other so much, do the show through September and then have the easy transition to GMA. Of course not, So I think there's a lot of egos and narcissism in the television business, to be honest. And I think when you get to that level, it's really, really high. And if you're Strahan, you were looking for another opportunity, which is his right. You got it. I understand why Kelly Ripa would be pissed. I mean, she's got a lot of sort of financial stake in that show. But people leave jobs, and this happens. I don't know when Strahan told her, and she probably did get blindsided, and I understand you'd be pissed about that. But you're also in the television business, and that's what people do. They jump to jobs. The one thing that, as a viewer and as someone who writes about media, that just like, in this case, I found it funny, but it's always just like, it's total BS. It's just portraying the love for each other when behind the scenes they're really disliking each other is such a con on the audience. But I think a lot of times the audience believes it. That's what's frustrating to me, is that, like, I would just tell anybody who's watching television as a general rule is be skeptical, especially about morning show love between everybody, because it's not always what you think. When you see people leave these shows, remember like 6 months before when they were talking about how they were a family and everything else.
I wondered. See, with Kelly though, I'm confused with her just because. Yeah, there's plenty of reports out there that they did not get along very well. Right. So I would assume she would be happy he's leaving, but she was, I guess, offended that she wasn't told until the last minute.
Right. Well, definitely, and I think that she's got a right to be pissed off about that. But the other thing I would say, AJ, is that she's probably a little worried. I mean, that show moved up in ratings when Michael was there. They had a good thing going in terms of interest, and so I'm sure that's part of it. Is that there was a comfort level, if nothing else, in that here's the host, here's the co-host, and the show goes on every day. Now she's got to parade in all sorts of people for auditions, and that puts more pressure on her as the lead host. So I can understand that, but to me it feels much more like an ego thing in that, one, you're leaving our show, and two, you didn't tell me you were leaving, and then three, if they weren't getting along regardless, that sort of adds to all the paranoia and stuff, and it just sort of blew up. And then finally, and this is where I do feel a little bit for Ripa and Strahan, you're on the cover of the New York tabloids when all this stuff happens. I mean, there's like kind of a ridiculous interest in it that overshoots the reality of what it should be. They're covered sometimes like presidents are covered, and so nobody probably wants to wake up in the morning and see your face plastered on the New York's two tabloids.
Yeah, at the same time, I would think the execs and Gelman. See, I used to watch Regis and
your stuff.
Regis and Kathy Lee. I'm back in the day when I used to go when I had my braces back in like 6th grade. They would have that show on in the office before school. So I would be pumped though. I'd be like, look at this pub we're getting, this free pub.
I agree.
They would have to, I would almost, if you want to be skeptical, I'm skeptical. I think it was all manufactured.
Maybe. I don't think it was the only reason I would say the all this stuff is not manufactured is because so much of the early reporting, nobody seemed to know. Every ABC initially said Strahan was going to stay until the end of whatever it was, the summer, and then he would morph. And now, as we all know, that changed quick, and they got him out of that show as fast as possible. So I don't think it was stage managed, because I think too many things changed after the news broke to where we are now. That said, I would have looked at it like you do. I look at it as like, people are talking about our stupid show. Like, when has that happened in the last year? So it gives, in my opinion, it gives Kelly Ripa a chance to like get a whole new audience, because people are now going to tune in to see this whole audition and all the people who may or may not do the show. I think it's a pretty good opportunity for her. The one thing I heard is that the network sort of paid her some cash for her trouble in terms of all this happening. So I think in the end, she's fine. I mean, she's going to make a ton of money, and the show's going to go on. She's going to have another co-host who she'll probably like better. And so in the end, it's just an ego thing. It's just she was pissed off that he left, and my sense is that he probably, maybe he liked sticking it to her because he didn't like her, and he was psyched to get what is a bigger show now. The more interesting thing as you head forward is, will Michael Strahan have any impact on Good Morning America's audience, and is that a good move for them to take more audience share away from the Today Show? I don't know. We'll see. The one tag that GMA always gets is that it's too female-centric, and there's not enough males on there. If that's, we'll see in a couple of months after Strahan is there whether he has any impact on that.
Either way, man, Strahan he's like the Ryan Seacrest, all the stuff he's doing.
He's the template, I think, for a lot of guys in any sport now as to how to leave your athletic sport and to cross over into popular culture.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of guys that can do that. I mean, let's be honest.
Jesse Palmer a little bit. I mean, there's just, generally speaking, there are not many people who have been stars, athletic stars, who have then crossed over into entertainment after they left. A lot of guys have obviously sports broadcasting success, but Strahan is a real outlier in that he's gotten to the, I hate to say it because of obviously what happened to the guy, but OJ and Strahan have a lot of similarities in that they crossed over into popular culture. OJ did, acting. He did some like morning show stuff. He did a ton of commercials. Just not many guys like that who were athletes first and then went into this. So Michael, he really is, I think he's the template for a lot of guys. I think there's a lot of guys who are going to try to follow that path. It's just, there are not going to be many who can pull it off. For whatever, Michael's got a good personality. I think the fact that he's 6'5" and gap tooth, he's got an interesting look. It's not an easy thing. Jesse Palmer obviously is a guy who looks like a model. I mean, you got to have certain attributes, I think, to pull that off.
Yeah, and to say the least, Strahan's a Hall of Famer. So it's like
that too.
The perfect storm of just that doesn't happen, man. Where Hall of Fame players can do that. Yeah,
because you put it this way: if he's not a Hall of Famer, he doesn't get the Fox NFL Sunday job. If he doesn't get the Fox NFL Sunday job, entertainment executives aren't seeing him. If entertainment executives aren't seeing him, he never gets the RIPA audition. If he never gets the RIPA job, he never gets GMA. So you're right. It all started with his fame on the football field got him to a place where he could get a big sports TV job, and then everything from there took off. He also clearly has very good management people working with him who've gotten him into fashion and stuff. I don't know who that guy's management is, but if I was an athlete, I'd want to get to know them because they have done a great job.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he has to have a gigantic team around him to keep up his schedule. But
seems like it.
Transitioning into something else, when I listened, you've had Troy Aikman on your podcast, man. What an awesome episode. And I've actually reached out to Troy a few times, just spoken over email and asked him about his preparation he does for games. And He talked about it, I think it was on your podcast, about the boards that he kind of created.
Yep.
And so you always ask these guys a lot of times, the broadcasters, like, walk us through a week of prep you do before a game. And so, like, that's obviously something that I want to do. I want to call games eventually. Like, who do you think would be good for me to talk to and would be the smartest guys? Like, who would be good for me to chat with on how to prep to do that kind of work?
I think if you want, are you sure talking about being a color analyst or
color? No, not play-by-play.
Okay, so I think and we're talking NFL, right?
Yeah, or college.
Or college. Okay, I would talk to the people who really, when you listen to them, really come off prepared and you learn stuff from them as a broadcaster. So Aikman for sure. Chris Spielman, great example of a guy who does his work. Chris Collinsworth, if you can get to him, another guy who just like you always seem to learn something. I think Gruden prepares, but it's a different kind of thing. That's much more of a personality broadcast than his prep, but there's no doubt that Gruden is a film wonk and he does all that stuff. All right, so let me think off the sort of the top of my head in terms of sort of doing boards and prep. I think there'd be value in talking to Todd Blackledge, who I always find is somebody who really knows the stuff. Gary Danielson at CBS, whether you like him or not, always knows what's sort of going on. Always knows what's sort of going on, at least in the SEC. Let me try to sort of think who else at that level. I think there's AJ. I mean, if you can get to any of these top guys, the Herb Streets, the Collinsworth, the Aikmans, they're all. You're going to learn something from all of them because they would not have gotten to their positions without doing the preparation and research over the years. Troy is a great example of a guy who just loves that part of the business. And I hear Spielman does too. That would be a guy I think would be really interesting to talk to because he's supposedly just a really good sort of preparation guy on that stuff. But I would say anybody who's doing major college football or NFL, top level games from sort of games 4 and up. I'll tell you another guy I think would be really good to talk to, Charles Davis, who has more from college to the NFL for Fox. Did the number 1 games of Fox on college with Gus Johnson for many years. Now he's doing NFL games on Fox. He's a really smart guy, and I think, to me, could sort of talk to you too about, and this is important, it's not just the boards. It's like, what's your interaction with coaches and players during the week? Do you call them away from the production meetings? Like, how much preparation and stuff are you doing? Joel Klatt told me, and he's now the number 1 guy at Fox for college football. Like he has like 7-10 guys. He emails like all the time with just to get the feel of what's going on college football. So he's like almost always reporting in a way. And to me, the best analysts in the business are just talking to as many people as possible, just so they have a real sense of what's going on like in the sport. And then when it comes to that specific game, they really dial down. Aikman, I think if I remember right, told me he would watch 2. If nothing else, minimum, I think he watched the 2 previous games before the game he was about to do. Fox would send him breakdowns of certain players where the camera's just focused only on that player. He watches all 22 tape. And then he obviously talks to the coaches and talks to the players. The one thing that's true, you should know this, I think you do from from playing and stuff, the analyst almost always leads to production meetings. So that would be your job. It's not Joe Buck asking too many questions or Vern Lundquist. It's Danielson and Aikman. That's their show. So that's the one thing that the analyst has to do in those production meetings with players and coaches. You got to be asking the right questions for the broadcast. That's your job. So I think as a general rule, the more people you talk to who are doing it at a high level, you're going to learn something just from those conversations. And Aikman, I just think Aikman's a great guy. He's very honest. He's a good dude. I think he's really smart. He'd be a great podcast guest as I had him on. I think if you can talk to him a couple of times, he's a great guy to deal with.
Well, thank you. Yeah, appreciate you throwing those guys out there. And it's true, the prep is what everyone doesn't see and is what comes across on air, that the guys that don't prep, you can tell instantly. And guess what? They're usually not there for much longer.
Ray Lewis, I mean, I got to be honest, a perfect example of a guy who just doesn't seem to do a lot of prep and he doesn't really say anything that interesting. I've had a lot of broadcasters tell me, you prep so much, you end up using 20% of what you researched. So you got to do 100% prep so that you get 20% on the broadcast. And that's a great broadcast. You're never going to get 100. It's the same thing with sideline reporters. Whether it's Aaron Andrews or Michelle Tafoya or Lisa Salters, they probably have so much stuff that never gets on the air, but you got to do the prep so that whatever does get on the air is sitting there in front of you and in your brain. Same thing with the analysts. You have to over prep so that you have a good broadcast.
so you can call it back, I think, and it's just on your mind at all
Exactly.
times. Like, so you don't have to think about it. You don't have these points in your head that you're trying to, you have to get out. It's just,
Right.
it's there.
Right. And that's where a great producer also is great too, is that if somebody does something and the producer has a clip because he's prepared of that player having done that 8 weeks earlier, you show that clip, and then you as the analyst, you've probably seen that clip too. You can say, yeah, this is exactly what this guy did 8 weeks ago against the Lions, and here's what he did then. Like that's how it all sort of works in symphony. But I've always found that listen, you could have a job without preparation, but as a general rule, the best people in the profession prepare.
They have to. And I'm actually headed out to LA to do I'm doing like 3 days on the morning show for NFL Network, NFL HQ.
Yeah,
I'm
nice.
gonna hit some other different podcasts and shows when I'm out there. So it'll be my first time really doing. I mean, I've done a lot in studio and stuff, but it'll be my first time doing like a consistent 3 days in a row of, I guess, just general topics around the league. So it's going to be a fun week for me. I think it's going to be a lot of prep. We go on early in the morning.
Right.
It's going to be different. So that's something where I've always I'm more open to it now, I would say, but I just always I never had a whole lot of fun sitting on a panel arguing with guys.
It's not gonna. I don't think it has to be arguing. I think it has to be conversation. You want to know my 2 very easy, quick tips for you when you're doing this?
Yes, please.
All right, here it is. One, I think you would do this anyway. Make sure you introduce yourself and shake the hand of everybody in the studio, from the camera people to the stage manager. That shows the producers on set that you understand that there are people who are making you look good, and those are the people who make you look good.
Yes.
So, and chat with them, whether it's about football or something else. And the other thing would be every person at NFL Network who's a producer, coordinating producer, video producer, get their email so you can network with them and stay in contact with them, because that is ultimately how you start building contacts in the business and getting those jobs. So that'd be the 2 things, is obviously not to, do the opposite of being an asshole to the stage people. And then with any producer in particular or executive that you come in contact, just ask them for their email, because you're interested in the business. You want to stay in touch with them. And that's how you start ending. That's in the end how you end up with like 100 contacts from around the different broadcast networks. And people in the business, generally speaking, will always be gracious and give you that, because it's the NFL Network's job to find talent. So if they think you could be good, it's their responsibility to sort of stay in touch with you. It's good for their business. So that would be the 2 things. But I think that's great. I mean, I feel like that's a good training ground morning show for so much stuff. If you can handle that, you can do a lot of different things.
It's like anything. You got to get reps on air and just got to keep doing
Absolutely.
it. That's a big reason I started this podcast, because I knew
it's all reps.
I mean, it's considered an interview, but it's not. It shouldn't feel like it. It shouldn't feel like it to you. It shouldn't feel like it to the listener.
Right.
But is that something you came across when you started your podcast? I guess you'd done interviews, but they're usually for print.
Different. Totally. You're totally right. I mean, I think I've gotten to be a better interviewer on the podcast because I've listened to the ones I've done. And I've tried to make it a really point to like talk less when I'm doing a subject. I have some tics that I do. I say the word interesting way too many times, so I'm trying to work on that. But yeah, it's very different. There's also, Alexi Lawless and I talked about this too. It's true. There's also a performance part. If I was interviewing you on the phone for a story, it'd be a little different than I'm interviewing you now. I know I'm being taped. I know I'm so there's always a performance aspect to it. And that's, you need reps to sort of, I think, get better at that. And I would still need a million more reps on TV to get better. Great piece of advice that Scott Van Pelt once, I heard him say to some journalism students or broadcast students. He said that the secret to television is to own TV as opposed to letting TV own you. So the second you can finally like stop thinking that you're on TV and just acting like you, then you got TV won. That's where I think someone like Barkley has it won. I don't think Charles Barkley thinks at all that there's 2 cameras here and 1 camera here, and that he's just talking on a set. And to me, I've always found that that's the Van Pelt advice, is like kind of like once you stop thinking about how do I look, how do I sound, how do I whatever, and you're just talking, then you got it made. Then it's really you, and then your intelligence and all this other stuff should come out.
Makes sense, man. It's great advice. I'm gonna let you roll, man. I'm gonna end it on that. But where would you like people to find you?
They can certainly check out the Sports Illustrated Media Podcast, which is on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. And feel free to hit me up ever on Twitter, which is at RICHARD DEITSCH. And AJ, I really appreciate the invite, man. I respect what you're doing. These are the kind of reps that like you do to get better. When you don't have 15 million people watching you, like I think this is smart. So I appreciate the invite, but more than that, no bullshit. I respect people who are just like self-starters and trying to come up with their own content. So I think this is really cool.
Well, thank you, man. That's a big reason. The number one reason I started is because you get to talk to cool people that you want to talk to.
Yeah, exactly.
It gives you an excuse. My brother has a great podcast, and he says the same thing. It gives me an excuse to reach out to like his mentors and guys that he's admired for a long time.
Same thing with me in the podcast. I'm a sports media nerd, and it's just fun to talk to people.
That's great, man. Well, Richard, thanks a lot, man. We'll get you on again down the road sometime, but I'll really appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot.
You got it. Good luck with the NFL Net.
All right, thank you.
All right, see you, man. Take.
We're glad you could join us for today's conversation. After you subscribe to the show, head over to thehawkcast.com or reach out to AJ directly on Twitter at @officialAJHawk to recommend future guests that will help us inspire people to keep talking. Thanks again, and we look forward to speaking with you next time on The HawkCast.